Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gope Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Yasodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yasodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Yasodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yasodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Gauranitai 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 Jaya Krishna Balaram Krishna Balaram Jaya Krishna Balaram Jaya Krishna Balaram Jaya Krishna Balaram Krishna Balaram Jaya Krishna Balaram Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Jayam Vishnu Paramahansa Parabhakacharya Astata Satashri Sriman, His Divine Loving Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jayam Vishnu Paramahansa Parabhakacharya Astata Satashri Sriman, His Divine Loving Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Ananta Koi Vaishnavinda Ki. Namacharya Haridas Thakur Ki. Pramshakaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Shri Gadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaur Bhaktavinda Ki. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Samakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki. Vrindavan Dham Ki. Mayapur Dham Ki. Navadvip Dham Ki. Shrimati Tulsi Devi Ki. Shrimati Bhakti Devi Ki. Samaveda Bhaktavinda Ki. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vastaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Name. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachani Nivashesha Sivadi Vasatya Dasatani. Om Agena Timrandasya Jana Jana Salakaya Chaksun Militanina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadanti Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutam Bhagavatam Shri Guru Vaishnavaṁśo Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajevam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhapitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisa Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate O Mahavananaya Krishna Prema Padayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namani Gaur Tushe Namaha Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vindavaneshwari Nishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakapa Drupyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this evening we are studying the 15th chapter, the Yoga of the Supreme, Bhagavad Gita, text 7. And I will say the verse, I'll repeat it 3 times, and so you can chant with me at home if you like. Mamaivāṁśo jīva-loke jīva-bhūtaḥ sanātanaḥ manaḥ-ṣaṣṭhānīndriyāṇi prakṛti-sthāni karṣati mamaivāṁśo jīva-loke jīva-bhūtaḥ sanātanaḥ manaḥ-ṣaṣṭhānīndriyāṇi prakṛti-sthāni karṣati mamaivāṁśo jīva-loke jīva-bhūtaḥ sanātanaḥ manaḥ-ṣaṣṭhānīndriyāṇi prakṛti-sthāni karṣati. And the word for word, mama, my, eva, certainly, amisha, fragmental parts, particle, jīva-loke, in the world of conditioned life, jīva-bhūtaḥ, the conditioned living entity, sanātanaḥ, eternal, manaḥ, with the mind, ṣaṣṭhānī, the 6 indrani, senses, prakriti, in the material nature, sthāni, situated, karṣati, is struggling hard. And the translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The living entities in this conditioned world are my fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the 6 senses, which include the mind. In this verse, the identity of the living being is clearly given. The living entity is the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, eternally. It is not that he assumes individuality in his conditioned life and in his liberated state becomes one with the Supreme. He is eternally fragmented. It is clearly said, sanātanaḥ. According to the Vedic version, the Supreme Lord manifests and expands himself in innumerable expansions, of which the primary expansions are called Vishnu Tattva, and the secondary expansions are called the living entities. In other words, thank you. The Vishnu Tattva is the personal expansion and the living entities are the separated expansions. By his personal expansion, he manifested in various forms like Lord Rama, Nrsimhadev, Vishnumurti, and all the predominating deities in the Vaikuntha planets. The separated expansions, the living entities, are eternally servitors. The personal expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the individual identities of the Godhead, are always present. Similarly, the separated expansions of the living entities have their identities as fragmental portions of his qualities, of which independence is one. Every living entity has an individual soul, has his personal individuality, and a minute form of independence. By misuse of that independence, one becomes a conditioned soul. And by proper use of independence, he is always liberated. In either case, he is qualitatively eternal, as the Supreme Lord is. In his liberated state, he is free. He is freed from the material condition, and he is under the engagement of transcendental service unto the Lord. In his conditioned life, he is dominated by the material modes of nature, and he forgets the transcendental loving service of the Lord. As a result, he has to struggle very hard to maintain his existence in the material world. I'm going to switch over to my book because I'm struggling in the material world. Okay. And he is under the engagement of transcendental service unto the Lord. In his conditioned life, he is dominated by the material modes of nature, and he forgets the transcendental loving service of the Lord. As a result, he has to struggle very hard to maintain his existence in the material world. The living entities, not only human beings and the cats and dogs, but even the greater controllers of the material world, Brahma, Lord Shiva, and even Vishnu, are all parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. They are all eternal, not temporary manifestations. The word karṣati, struggling or grasping hard, is very significant. The conditioned soul is bound up as though shackled by iron chains. He is bound up by the false ego, and the mind is the chief agent which is driving him in this material existence. When the mind is in the mode of goodness, his activities are good. When the mind is in the mode of passion, his activities are troublesome. And when the mind is in the mode of ignorance, he travels in the lower species of life. It is clear, however, in this verse that the conditioned soul is covered by the material body with the mind and the senses, and when he is liberated, this material covering perishes, but his spiritual body manifests itself in its individual capacity. The following information is there in the manaḥ-ṣaṣṭhānīndriyāṇi Shruti. Sava Esha Brahmanishta Idam Sarviramartyam Astriya Brahma Vishya Sampadaya Brahmana Pashyati Brahmana Snoti Brahmanaivedam Svarvam Anubhavati. It is stated here that when a living entity gives up this material embodiment and enters into the spiritual world, he revives his spiritual body. And in his spiritual body, he can see the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. He can hear and speak to him face to face. He can understand the Supreme Personality as he is. From Smriti also, it is understood. Vasanti yatra purusha sarve vaikunta murtaya. In the spiritual planets, everyone lives in bodies featured like the Supreme Personality of Godheads. As far as bodily construction is concerned, there's no difference between the part and parcel living entities and the expansions of Vishnumurti. In other words, at liberation, the living entity gets a spiritual body by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The words mamaivāṁśo, fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, are also very significant. The fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is not like some material broken part. We have already understood in the second chapter that the spirit cannot be cut into pieces. This fragment is not materially conceived. It is not like matter which can be cut into pieces and joined together again. That conception is not applicable here because the Sanskrit word sanātanaḥ, eternal, is used. The fragmental portion is eternal. It is also stated in the beginning of the second chapter that in each and every individual body, the fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is present. Dehiosmin yata dehe. That fragmental portion, when liberated from the bodily engagement, revives its original spiritual body in a spiritual sky and a spiritual planet and enjoys association with the Supreme Lord. It is, however, understood here that the living entity, being the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, is qualitatively one with the Lord, just as the parts and parcels of gold are also golds. Jai. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So Krishna and Srila Prabhupada are emphasizing in this verse the separateness that the jiva has from the Supreme Lord. And the Bhagavad Gita is covering several subject matters, and one of them is the jivas and one of them is Ishvara. And so this is interesting because it's the relationship between the two. We also understand that Krishna has three primary energies. He's got his Ataranga Shakti, which is his internal energy. And he has his Tatastha Shakti, his marginal energy. And he has his Bariranga Shakti, his external energy. Now we are the Tatastha Shakti. We're the marginal Shakti. We're the marginal energy in which we can associate with the material, we can associate with the spiritual. It's kind of like that place on the ocean, on the shore, where the waves come in, and sometimes the tide goes way out, so that particular strip of a shoreline gets very dry. And when the waves come in, it gets very wet. So we can associate with both. But we're always subservient. We're always subordinate. And that when we are under the control of the internal potency, we display our natural constitutional activities, namely constant engagement in devotional service of the Lord. And the Bhagavad Gita confirms this in 9:13. Manastu mampartha. O son of Prita, those who are not deluded, the great souls, are under the protection of the divine nature. They are they are fully engaged in devotional service because they know me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, original and inexhaustible. So that one analogy that Srila Prabhupada gives us with the ocean and the jiva compared to Krishna is, I find it really great, because if you took a cup of water out of the ocean and did an analysis of the water, the chemical components in that water, in that little cup, would be the same as what's in the ocean. However, it's not the same in the quantity, and it's not the same as what it can do. The little cup of water cannot sustain a huge amount of ecosystem. It doesn't have a large amount of plant life and animal life and fish life, and it doesn't have tides and waves and storms or anything like this. It's just this little cup of water. So that's like we are compared to Krishna. Now, where that analogy loses steam, so to speak, is when you pour back that water into the ocean, it can merge. But we never merge. We're always separate individuals. And we have this quality in a minute amount of free will and independence. And Krishna does not want to mess with that free will. He lets us have it. Because how can you love somebody unless it's through their free will? If a man suddenly found out his wife was only married to him because she had to be, it would ruin the marriage, or vice versa. So really, to have a deep, meaningful, loving relationship with Krishna, it has to be from our hearts, completely our will. So we're Satchidananda Vigraha, but in minute quantities. But the problem is when the soul is covered by this illusory energy, this Bahiranga Shakti, by the external energy, it's covered by earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And these can all be perceived through our senses. We can smell earth, we can taste water, we can see fire, we can feel air, and we can hear ether through sound. But the mind, the false ego, and the intelligence, we can't really actually see it with our senses. So the soul is entrapped by this body. And again, the Bhagavad Gita confirms this at 7.5. Besides these almighty arms, Arjuna, there is another superior energy of mind which comprises of the living entities who are exploiting the resources of this material inferior nature. So it's interesting. We went from chapter 4 to chapter 15, which is actually brilliant. Because in chapter 4, it's talking about transcendental knowledge. So we all have that memory is not too far away. And between 33 and 42, it talks, if we can learn that knowledge well, then we can come enlightened by the mercy under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master. And particularly text 42, Krishna tells Arjuna, he tells him to slash these doubts with the weapon of knowledge. So if we look at the illusion and the suffering of the lineages who are choosing to associate with material energy, we understand very clearly it's birth, it's old age, disease, and death. That is the main problem, and the cycle, the repeated cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. So I thought we take a moment to really look at what these different things are this evening. And birth is interesting because, you know, when someone hears they're going to have a baby, everyone's so excited. They have parties, you know, glorifying this birth, which in the case of a Vaishnava is definitely reason for celebration. But the problem is there's so much ignorance, is that at the time of conception, due to the consciousness of these parents conceiving this child, it's attracting a certain soul to the womb. And if they're in ignorance about this situation, they can be attracting some very, very demoniac souls to the womb. And so as devotees, you know, we're very careful about chanting 50 rounds and maintaining strict celibacy unless there's a desire for taking care of a child. So, and then also we understand from the Srimad Bhagavatam how much suffering there is in the womb. Fortunately, the child isn't even conscious until he's 7 months, about 7 months along. Then he regains consciousness and is totally aware of his hellish situation, which is so cramped. He's held in by a bag of skin and bones and all kinds of disgusting things. And he's got worms biting his body. He's in such distress. He's praying to God, please let me out and I will be your faithful devotee. I will follow the 4 regular principles. I will read the books. I will be the best devotee. And then there's the actual birth itself. And this is an interesting fact that, you know, if you've ever seen a newborn baby, you'll notice right about here on the top of their head, there's a little soft spot. And that's because when they're being born, they have to come out of such a small space. Their head actually contracts into itself. Now, can you imagine how absolutely painful that would be if your skull collapsed into itself? Yeah. And then they're immediately told they're so cute and they're so adorable and they're taken such good care of. So it's so easy for them to forget and become illusioned again. Not only that, as they grow, they fall in love with their material body because the body's doing so much. Oh, look at me, I'm feeding myself now. I can walk, I can run, I can play all these sports. And the sports are such an illusion in itself, right? So much money is spent on this sports world, so to speak, with football, soccer, the Olympics, and people who can't even do sports, they spend so much time and money just watching these things because of glorifying this material body, billions and billions of dollars. But then the old age sets in. And that's where the body really turns on the poor living entity. And Srila Prabhupada says, nobody wants to get old. And I was actually sitting in a lecture in LA, and Srila Prabhupada, it looked to me like he was looking right at me. And he said, don't think this won't happen to you. And in my ignorance, I was thinking, well, yes, we'll get old, but we'll be pure devotees by that time, so it won't matter so much. Because we're just seeing Srila Prabhupada, and he never complained about anything. He never even appeared sick until the last few months of his life. He was very vibrant and very, very strong and so determined to serve Krishna. Such an amazing personality. But unfortunately, old age is a very miserable thing. And and I won't even bore you with the miseries of old age, but let's just say they don't end. They just get worse. Then there's the disease. Now, disease could happen before old age, which is a terrible thing, but there's so many diseases, unlimited amounts of diseases. Just with cancer, there's 200 different varieties of cancer. And talk about money spent on diseases and trying to avoid them. What to say of this whole coronavirus fiasco that we're all going through now? And that's interesting because that was started in China in some wet market. And I never knew what a wet market was before I learned this. And it's quite disgusting. But these poor animals, they take these animals out of their natural habitat, wild animals, and they keep them in tight, filled with other animals' cages, stacked on top of each other. So it's a filthy condition, and they're in total distress. And so their bodies get sick, and they get viruses from this. And then they start slaughtering these poor little creatures in front of their family and friends. And so at that point, that living entity is so afraid that the virus jumps from them into the human. And you would think, after all this, they would at least close this wet market down? No. So this misery, we have no idea how much longer this will go on. And so we'll go to death. Death, yes, death. Everyone wants to avoid death. And we know what Yudhishthira had admitted to being the most amazing thing is that everybody's around us is dying, but we are not thinking that we are going to die. And in America, they have become so expert at extending death. I have a dear friend whose mother has been in the process of dying since April. Unfortunately, she is not the one with the control over the situation. Her brother, who is a very powerful person and not a devotee, is in control of his mother's situation. And they have a great deal of money. And so he's given the instruction that whatever happens, just resuscitate her. Can you imagine? She has been having strokes continuously since April. And the poor woman is so confused. She doesn't even know where she is. And they can't go visit her because of this virus thing. They can't even go in and see her. And she thinks, because she's in such a confused condition, when my friend calls her, she tells her, I've been kidnapped. And because she's being cared for from people from different countries, she says, one day she says, I'm in Africa. Can you pay the ransom? Get me out of here? It's so sad. It's such a terribly sad, long death for this woman. And this is the situation, is people, they're so afraid of dying that they extend the horrific situation. And the problem with death is that when death is final, and you've lost that opportunity, if you haven't used this human life properly, that it may not come for many, many more cycles of birth, death, disease, and old age. So Krishna can be known by the Vedas. And Srila Prabhupada says specifically the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he who understands and learns about Krishna, he understands everything then. And that the knower of Krishna is always to engage in the transcendental loving service of Krishna. And this is confirmed again in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 10th chapter. Ham sarvasya prabhavo mahatma sarvam prakṛti ijima prajanti mam urabhava samavitaha. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who knows this perfectly engages in my devotional service and worships me with all their hearts. So Srila Prabhupada, when he preaches, you can hear the urgency in his voice about how the house is on fire and we need to get out. And we need to get out as many other people as possible, because this is a very dangerous situation. And I wanted to read some of the quotes that Prabhupada gave about preaching and about spreading this movement. Because even though now we're everything's so shut down, but it's a good time for us to reflect and think of ways to do this. Actually, I was talking to a friend of mine in California, where Vaisheshik, that temple that he's at, And they're distributing more books online now than they ever had before. They're recontacting people who have bought books and telling them about other books. So it's a wonderful time for them. So Srila Prabhupada, if we adhere to the order of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we shall get spiritual strength without a doubt, and we shall be free to preach this cult of the Hare Krishna movement and not be hampered by anyone. If you are actually benevolent to your countrymen, to your society, to the human society, you must preach this Krishna conscious movement. If you care for anyone at all, this is our business. Krishna will certainly be pleased to give you more strength to preach this glorious movement of Krishna consciousness. So please, keep yourselves steady in the manner you are now keeping yourselves. And that's referring to sadhana and our chanting and our hearing and our following religious principles. Krishna conscious movement is now well spread all over the world. The framework is there. So anyone can go and preach the Krishna conscious movement very easily, and people will take it. You know, and this is so true. It is. The framework is out there. When we first started this movement, I can tell you, people thought we were freaks. And maybe they weren't so wrong, but they were terrified of us. But in just the last couple of years, I've noticed going out on Harinam, people would stand, they'd be eating outside in a restaurant, and they would stand and raise their beer bottles and cheer us. Oh, the Hare Krishnas. I even had one experience in an airport. I wasn't dressed as a devotee. I was sitting waiting for a plane that was delayed, and people had started talking to each other. It was delayed so long. And you could see in a distance, it was probably at least, 100 feet away, a devotee walked by. And somebody blurts out, "Oh, a Hare Krishna devotee. They're so nice." It's actually our reputation is fairly good. So don't be afraid to speak to someone. Be bold. Be strong in your Krishna consciousness. And Srila Prabhupada, he quoted his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, when he said, "One can preach who has life." And our last quote from Srila Prabhupada is, "Our relationship is based on Krishna consciousness. So the more successful you preach and help the Hare Krishna movement, the more our relationship in transcendental platform is firm and fixed up." The direct connection between that. So Prabhupada's mood was the house was on fire, and we had to get out. And that's why he didn't focus a lot on Purushottamamath or Chaturmasya, is he wanted us to become strong in our ability to preach this movement, so that anyone we spoke to, everyone we met, we could tell them something about Krishna consciousness. And we could learn from the way that Srila Prabhupada, he spoke with people. He had a way of understanding just what they could hear and giving them just that. He didn't drown them in Krishna consciousness. He had a sensitivity. I know when I first met a devotee, the first devotee I met, I had a picture. He had come to a place I was working. And I had a picture on the wall of Mother Yasoda chasing baby Krishna with a stick. I had no idea who anybody was. It's not COVID. And so I wanted to know, who was this woman chasing this little boy, little blue boy with a stick? I just wanted to know who this was, and what the story was. And he was actually a new devotee too. And in defense of him, the Krishna book wasn't out yet. They had no idea. And so I asked him, and he looked at me, and his eyes were kind of spinning. He just went, "You must surrender to the parampara system." So we have to be sensitive. We have to preach with some type of sensitivity to what people can hear. So, so Bali Maharaj, the great demon, you know, the one who made the demigods scatter out of the heavenly planets. When he was performing his sacrifice to become even more powerful, the one where the beautiful Vamana Dev's dwarf incarnation appeared, he had a sister sitting, observing this whole sacrifice and ceremonies. And when Vamana Dev appeared, he's so beautiful. He had a golden glow. He had soft, beautiful skin. He was small and precious. And he's carrying an umbrella and a water pot. And he's dressed like an ascetic. And she saw him. And immediately her desire and thought was, oh, I wish he was my child. This was her thought. But as the events went on through the day, and you know, Bali Maharaj ended up losing everything. He ended up in chains. He ended up completely humiliated. And by that time, she was so angry at this little beautiful boy that she wanted to kill him. So as yugas went on, she took birth and became one of the most notorious wicked witches ever. Her name was Putana. And she knew the black art of killing small children in ghastly, sinful ways. And she would drink their blood. She would just, even by Kali Yuga's standards, she was so evil and so disgusting. She's called a Kachuri because she could fly in the sky by the branch of an uprooted tree. And Srila Prabhupada said, in the 70s, he said that there were still witches like this in Northwest India. And if that's true, let me know. I was curious, they're still there now. But one of her many mystic powers was she could also disguise herself. Now, Kamsa, he met with his evil ministers, and he was so intent on killing this Krishna. And he had heard about Putana and her wicked ways that he enlisted her in killing. And he didn't care who he killed. He just sent her out to kill every child that was under a certain age. So with her mystic powers, she disguised herself as some beautiful woman. She had, her hair was beautifully coiffed. She had lovely earrings on, a very thin waist and beautiful clothes. She had flowers in her hair. She was glancing everywhere with a demure little smile. And she was carrying a lotus in her hand. And when she came into Raj, everyone thought that she was the goddess of fortune and that she was coming to see Krishna. And they found her so beautiful and so charming. They were chiding the demigoddesses and saying, oh, you should hide your faces. You have nothing over this beautiful woman who's come to Raj. And so she walked right into Nanda Maharaj's home. She had some story where she had lost her baby and she had so much breast milk, and if they had a baby who could drink some of her breast milk. And so this wicked Putana, she had smeared the most awful poison on her breast. It could kill hundreds of elephants. And she walked right into this room where little baby Krishna, maybe 2 or 3 months, very young, very little, sleeping on a little baby bed, you know, made it specially for him. He was just sleeping there. And she walks right in to give her her breast. And she held back for a moment. She held back because something she was perceiving. And Srila Prabhupada says, perhaps maybe it was Krishna in the heart, reminding her of her desire to have this beautiful Krishna as her son. Or perhaps it was the Lord in the heart reminding her she wanted to kill this child. But also she was perceiving the strength of this baby. So she held back for just a moment. And then Krishna closed his eyes. And there's different reasons that acharyas and devotees say that Krishna closed his eyes. Because the first one is that he didn't want to see the face of this horrible, wretched woman that had killed so many innocent children, so many little children. Another reason was that Putana was hesitating, and so Krishna, he closed his eyes so that she couldn't perceive exactly how powerful, I had a glimpse of how powerful he could be. And then a third reason was that Krishna appeared to kill demons, right? Give protection to his devotees. Paritrasaya sadhunam is that the first demon he was killing was a woman. And the Vedas prohibit the killing of women, brahmanas, old men, and children. And the last reason is that he took her as his nurse. And so he was just comfortably closing his eyes and relaxing. So she went and she put her nipple into his mouth. And he took it right away. And with his little tiny hands, he grabbed onto her breast very tight. And it shocked her and surprised her. And all of a sudden she could feel not only was the poison being sucked out, but all the milk was being sucked out, and her life air was going. So she had to run outside because she couldn't maintain this disguise of this body. And she was screaming, "Oh, child, leave me, child." And she fell down into the ground. Her arms are flailing, her legs are kicking, and this earth is shaking. The inhabitants of Raj are in shock. They have no idea what is going on. And he sucks out her life air. And there she is lying on the ground. Her hair is all scattered like some big red bush of tangled thorns. And her eyes were like blind wells. They were deep and meaningless. And her teeth were like plows. Her nostrils were like small caves. Her breasts were like small hills. Her stomach was like a dried up lake. And her hips were like banks of a river. And by that time, the cowherd women gathered themselves up, looking for Krishna, ran outside, and they see baby Krishna playing on this big, huge, dead demon. And I'm sure you've probably been to that place in Gokul. It's 12 miles long. When she fell, she crushed a whole orchard. It belonged to Kamsa, no less. And she just dented the earth to this day. 5,000 years later, it's still dented a great deal by what she had done. So, of course, the cowherd men and the cowherd women, especially Shoda and Mohini, they were so concerned about Krishna, and they were so worried that some danger would come to him. So they started circumambulating a cowtail around him and washing him completely in cow urine. And then in the dust of the hooves of the cow, this is a very purifying bath, is dust from the hooves of the cow. And then they started chanting different mantras of Krishna to protect different parts of his body. So what happened to this wretched witch? She went to Goloka. She went to Goloka to be a nurse for Krishna. Krishna accepted her offering. So back in that assembly Pali Madharan had. She had a glimmer of association with the Supreme Lord. She just saw him and had this wish that this could be my son. I could care for him. A nurse is one of the 7 mothers. And so after some time, Krishna arranged for her desires to come true. So he gave her the opportunity. He gave her opportunity to make an offering to him. And he gave her the opportunity to try to kill him. And she reached perfection. So I'm going to end here. And if somebody would like to add something or ask some questions.
Hare Krishna, please, if anyone wants to ask, you can put your hand up. You can unmute and ask.
All righty. Then we shall end here. We'll pray to stay engaged in devotional service.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.